Thank you all very much for coming here tonight. And I'm going to start with my angel's wings, and then I'll have to take them off. Otherwise, my audiovisual friends are going to kill me. But it is quite extraordinary to see what happens when you say that you're going to do a program on angels. People really jump off their seats and are so interested and so excited. I think it's something visceral, pretty much what happened with the gastrodiplomacy salon. It was visceral too. But I think that we are so in need of angels lately that it almost feels comforting to be able to talk about them. But angels are a slippery concept, and we'll get there really soon, but I wanted to first introduce myself because maybe some of you are new at these salons. My name is Paola Antonelli, and I've been working at this museum for 25 years. I'm happy to say, yes, thank you. And a few years ago, we started at the museum this new initiative, the MoMA R&D, and there's a lot of R and very little D, that's what I always say, but the R is really, really good. And part of the R are these salons, where we have arrived at number 28, which is unbelievable. But the idea behind these salons is to show people that museums can help in real life, in day-to-day issues. They can help people deal with the truth or lack thereof, with death, with protesting, with taboos. They can help people just make a stronger sense, build a stronger critical sense so as to become stronger citizens and be able to push back when necessary. So very often we find the themes for these salons in real life. And we have a long list of possible salons and some really tasty ones that are coming. But we decided that we wanted to talk about angels because of how we're all feeling. We're all feeling lost, and or many of us, I'm sure, are feeling lost. And angels are guides and messengers. They are there to help us through. Angels exist in pretty much all religions, and especially in Abrahamic ones, as you can imagine. You know, there are angels in Islamic in texts, there are angels in Judaism, there are angels in Christianity. We can find them pretty much in all religions, Abrahamic and non-Abrahamic. And sometimes we confuse them with other spirits. We'll talk about them afterwards. It's a slippery concept, that of angels, because angels sometimes are spirits that guide us, and we make them up. And it's okay, because angels are supposed to be really enmeshed with humans. They are actually the lowliest rung of celestial beings. There are so many above them. There are seraphims, there are cherubs, there are archangels, of course. There are 3 spheres before you get to the lowliest rung, that of angels. And maybe that's why we love them so much, because they are vulnerable. They are not invincible, and they help us through like best friends. They are also not always nice and dependable. But, you know, that's something we'll get to afterwards. Also, interestingly, there are all sorts of angels with all sorts of appearances. One of the mottos about angels is that they're always white, and we'll get to that later. But actually, there's a lot of black angels in the beautiful churches in Ethiopia and Eritrea. It's just that we all make angels into what we need at a particular time and at a particular moment. And obviously, different peoples in different parts of the world have felt the need to be represented. And indeed, angels are about representation often, and very happily so. The angels that we find in the Renaissance, that we find in so many of the illustrations before the Renaissance and afterwards, take all sorts of aspects. And you're looking here at some non-Abrahamic religions and Abrahamic, no, we're still in Abrahamic religions. So they're mostly messengers. And in fact, Michal, which is the Judaism version of the angel as messenger, has the same qualities as Christian angels. And the same happens with Islamic angels that were meant to be directly messengers of Allah that would come into the world to help people through. So they all have this aspect of guides and messengers that we can find in all different religions. I was telling you about the different angels that come, the different celestial beings that come before angels, and you see there cherubims and seraphims with that have many more wings and also take on different aspects. And it's only the lowliest angels that look almost like human beings. But because angels are so close to humans, often they have a direct contact with them. And we wanted to show you just a few examples of direct connection between humans and angels. The Shaker community is one of the most interesting examples. You know, the Shakers are a sect that began in England in the 18th century and then migrated into the United States and actually made their headquarters or their centers in upstate New York. And they were really a very, very interesting community. They had parity of genders, celibacy, and a real dedication to, guess what, great design. And they were called Shakers because of the behavior that they would have during their rituals, but in reality there was a whole world that they built that was really all completely set on the idea of purity and simplicity. And the wonderful thing is that they said very openly that they would see angels, that they had visions of angels. And actually, a wonderful priest that was commenting on their design and on their furniture said that those chairs were so beautiful and simple and pure because they were made for angels to sit on. So the connection between Shakers and angels is really interesting, and you can find a lot of readings about it also in the list that we gave you. We were saying before how sometimes angels are not necessarily anthropomorphic and are not necessarily the kind of winged creatures that we're used to seeing in the West. Sometimes angels are invested in objects. There's animism and totemism in many religions all over the world. And in this case, in particular, the baobabs in Africa, especially in Senegal and Ethiopia, have been really important as symbols and as convoys and vessels of divinity. You see on the upper bottom left, the Black Madonna Shrine, which is actually built inside a baobab in Ethiopia. And the Senegalese baobab trees that have become part of almost like elders of the communities all over Senegal. And down here, to talk about instead a Native American religion with culture that is that of the Iroquois, you see here the Sky Woman from 1936 that is a myth, an Iroquois myth that once again is about a messenger, in this case a woman coming from the sky to speak to human beings. Also in the Nigerian, southeastern Nigerian Igbo culture, the Chi are private personal gods. And you see here two great writers, Chinua Achebe and Bono Ojike, that spoke about the Chi as personal gods. So the angels that are embedded in us, that are so enmeshed in us that every person is an angel or a god, their own personal gods. Once in Seoul, I saw a beautiful exhibition that was called Ghosts, Shamans, and Grandmothers. And I will never forget it because, in a way, it showed how every single person could be a spirit or a guide to other human beings. And that's also what we're going to discuss tonight a lot. But here's another great story about angels embedded in objects. I don't know if you've ever heard about the Luktep dolls in Thailand. These are dolls that are completely invested with angelic features and characteristics, so much so that they become well, you could say that it's superstition, that they are good luck charms, but it's much more than that. And being Italian, I know superstition, this is more than that. These are dolls that sometimes are sold for thousands of dollars and that people actually carry with them on airplanes, to supermarkets, to restaurants. And there are very serious businesswomen that give interviews and say that these dolls are the reason of their success. So it really is a very serious phenomenon that is about animism. In art, angels have been represented in many different ways throughout the centuries, but I'm going to leave that to one of our speakers who knows how to define them and to describe their artistic art in much more detailed terms. I would like, though, to point out in the middle, Bill Viola and the Five Angels for the Millennium. I think that lately, the images of angels have become much more ominous, and we have been fascinated much more with their dark side, which I find really interesting, even though at the same time, we need so much their light side, as we will see later. And also, angels have been part of popular culture for a very long time. You see, there were several pictures from the Met Gala from last year. You see there Katy Perry, but there were many others that went for the wing kind of version. And you see, usually all the angels that you see in popular culture tend to be of the white, winged, pure, cute, beautiful, serene kind. I remember my first job, I'm going to tell you here, I was 13, was at Fiorucci in Milan. And I remember forever that Fiorucci had the symbol of the cherubs. So popular culture gives us this kind of angel, while indeed we need much more, because if we want angels to help us guide, angels have to respond to our pain and have to help us through everyday life. They cannot be perfect. Angels very often are also looking over cities. That's quite beautiful to see. And in a way, even though there have been so many discussions about the kind of monument that we have erected in the past and whether they can stand the test of time and also the ethical judgment of nowadays, angels somehow get away with it. I don't think that people can really fight against angels. Maybe they can fight against their features and the fact that they come very often as representative of the white Western race. That's a problem, perhaps, but the idea that an angel can look over a city or look over humanity is somehow much more accepted than other representative of either religions or politics. And of course, we inserted here, just as a touch, the beautiful Wings of Desire that actually in Italy was called The Sky over Berlin, and Bruno Ganz over there as the representative that is looking over Berlin. And I was telling you before how the dark side of angel is somehow represented, the dark but also the sublime side of angels. So it's darkness and terror, but also relief and release. You see here two scenes from the latest version, the latest play of Angels in America on Broadway. When I came to New York 25 years ago, the first thing that I saw in the theater 2 months after arriving was Angels in America. And having never been a big theater person, I was terrified at the idea of 6 hours in a theater. But instead, I was really, I was mesmerized, and I could not believe how beautiful that was. The angel is very imperfect in Angels in America, but it also responds really to the need not only for salvation, but also for release of anger and release of desperation at that time. So it's interesting how angels usually take us also as sign of the times and as signs of our most innermost needs. The black angel image has become really important in the past decades, but now more than ever. Eartha Kitt and her 1970 Paint Me Black Angels song that was coming from a movie called Angelitos Negros from a few decades before, has become the inspiration for many other pieces of art, from Mickalene Thomas' Angelitos Negros, all the way to Blood Orange Dev Hynes and Negro Swan. So it's really important to see how it's a continuity that has to do with a particular culture, with the need to have guidance and protection in a particular community at different times. There are similar examples also in smaller communities in Italy and in other parts of the world that we don't have time to delve in here, but I want to point out to you also the work of John Henry that speaks about mothers as being the angels, especially in the situation, in the predicament that we're in these past decades of violence against especially young Black American boys and men. So mothers become the angels. And here is really the point, the representation. Who is an angel, and what should angel look like? There are all these ideas that boys and little girls are like angels, and when they die, it's a pity because an angel dies. But then when Michael Brown was gone down in Ferguson in 2014, there was an African-American writer of the New York Times that actually said he was no angel. And there was this gigantic debate that started about this particular word, he was no angel. What does it mean to be an angel? And if you're not an angel, then you can be left to die, otherwise you're worth saving. So it really is the point of discussing who is an angel and what defines an angel. Angels indeed come in so many different aspects in our everyday life. And one of the big questions that Samantha Ozer, it's her first salon, by the way, I'm going to introduce her to you properly afterwards, but that Samantha and I had is, what's the difference between an angel and a hero? And you know, you'll hear in the comments of some of our video testimonials, you'll have more of a sense of what the answer to that could be. But you see, there are so many different kinds of angels that range from Sherilyn Ifill from the NAACP to Dan Savage, to the guardian angels, to Grace Lee Boggs, and to some people consider some of these angels, and some might consider them devils. It's really interesting because there's also that double side. But in truth, angels come in many different aspects, and they are immanent in our lives. They walk with us. And tonight we have 4 great speakers to discuss with us this matter. We're going to start with Annette Yoshiko-Reed, who's a professor at NYU and really studies angelology and demonology. You have the bios that are more at length in the website. Then we will go to Mustafa Ali Faruqi, who's a great architect that actually works with angels as clients and also other clients, but does intake facilities for angels. Then we'll have Jacoby Satterwhite, who is a great artist that has been working on the idea of angels for quite a while, and I'll let him describe it more, also his particular brand of and blend of art. And last but not least, we have Carl Derswicki, who is from MoMA and from MoMA's education department, who works with teen and with communities here at MoMA. Interspersed amongst their presentations will be video testimonials that are not here, but you'll see later by whom they are, by really great speakers. And we're going to start with the first ones that are going to be by, first it's going to be Susan Burton. Susan Burton, who's the founder of A New Way of Life. She was in prison, and when she got out of prison, she decided to found this charity to help both ex-inmates and families readjust to life and just put that moment of prison behind them. And the second video will be by Amanda Lawrence, who played the angel in the latest installment of Angels in America. So I'm going to start with the videos, please.
On the topic of angels, I believe in angels. You know, I pray for angels to walk with me, to be around me, to protect me, and, you know, I know this is happening. My life is just so different from the dark days, and it's our responsibility, my responsibility, to lead other people to the light, that they won't have dark and they won't feel hate, that they'll feel love, they'll feel supported, and maybe they too will believe in the angels, because I definitely do.
The angel in Angels in America, and in this particular production, is not very white and clean and majestic and coming from above. This character, this angel, crashes to the ground. She is dirty, she is damaged, she is torn apart. She comes from a very cracked world. This angel is cracked. There are fissures. God has abandoned her and her group of angels that she comes from her heaven. So this is all very informative. She has a very particular language. The language massively informs this particular angel. It is an other language. It is biblical. It has a very strong idea, and it is not. It is very direct. He, she is male and female. He, she has 8 vaginas. He, she has a bouquet of phalli. She is a golden eagle, a bald eagle. She is America. And what that means to Prior, because she comes out of Prior. So preparing for that role comes from the language, comes from the ideas grown within the room, from the costume design, from the director. And the approach we used was very cracked and damaged, and to terrify, which all angels must do, to wrestle in the classic way, Jacob and the angel. But Prior wins. He's battling with his disease. It's a very physical role. To play an angel is very physical. The language demands that you are physical. You feel just the speaking of it, it's very full. It's very, very rich. And it takes a lot of preparation, a lot of fullness. But I'd say all those characters in that play do, in their different ways, are very full and have specific languages. So in many ways, playing an angel, in many ways, is a human experience as well. I'll leave that there.
Call Annette Yoshiko-Reed to the podium. Go, Annette.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a delight to be here. Oops, I'm sorry to you. Why does humankind imagine angels? Even a historian of religion like myself would not deign to suggest that history might suffice to answer such a question. Indeed, as we shall see throughout the night, it's impossible to reduce the cultural power of angels or their global resonance or personal meanings to any one historical story about one particular time or one particular people or place. In my brief time here, however, I would like to share one moment of ancient historical change that I personally find to be especially potent for thinking about what speculation about angels can do and mean within human cultures. This moment is a bridge onto the gap between ancient Israel on the one hand and later forms of Judaism and Christianity and Western culture on the other. But it is also, I'd like to suggest, something that highlights a continuum in some of the enduring meanings of angels as well, telling us something about how the practice of talking about angels can serve to pierce the shroud of ineffability around the divine, but also, and perhaps more importantly at times, how writing about angels can be a poignant way to explore what it means to be human. In the very oldest traditions in the Hebrew Bible, what Jews call today the Tanakh and Christians the Old Testament, one finds many angels. But what one does not yet find is what we might call angelology. Angels have no personal names, no personalities, no systematic sets or classes. They are undifferentiated, non-individuated, indistinguishable, and that's precisely the point. In the biblical literature of ancient Israel, what's emphasized about angels is not anything about them per se as entities in their own right. The focus falls rather on their functions. They are the armies of God's heavenly hosts, his power with their sheer multitude. They are the chorus of his praise. They are the architecture of his heavenly domain and the enlivened structures that bear his throne, wheels and hosts, stars and fire, spirits described in a manner often indistinguishable from the wind. At times, in early biblical books like Genesis, the function of angels extends to divine acts of communication. It is this function, in fact, that gives us the English word angel, a word that comes from the Greek angelos, which translates the Hebrew malach, which means messenger. Both the ancient Hebrew and ancient Greek words can refer to people who bear messages as well. But what's different about otherworldly angels is that their reality is limited to just that. What they are is just that action of communication, after which they dissipate, like smoke of extinguished flame. They are not agents of communication, they are conduits, like a phone line, only active when enlivened by a voice. In this case, the voice of messages of God to humankind, news, and dreams. If this is what we find in the very oldest text in the Hebrew Bible, how did it come to be that later Jews and Christians talk about angels quite differently, and in the ways that have now become so influential in the West and beyond, where angels are entities in their own right with names and classes and peoples to protect? By the time of the latest book in the Hebrew Bible, the book of Daniel, angels do get names, and they don't just appear in dreams, they also interpret them, as Gabriel does for Daniel. And so too, centuries later in the New Testament, where figures like Gabriel and Michael and Raphael are archangelic entities with stable profiles, personalities, who persist even after they fulfill this or that function. What then accounts for these change? How do angels emerge as less akin to wind and fire, and finally more akin to people with personalities? Until relatively recently, this question was somewhat of a mystery for historians of religion. But like so much else, it's a mystery that has been solved more recently in large part by the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the middle of the 20th century, which has made it newly possible to connect the dots, which link the earliest biblical literature from ancient Israel on the one hand, with later Judaism and Christianity on the other. Among the fragments discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls were manuscripts of the most ancient Jewish literature outside of the Hebrew Bible, some of which is even earlier than Daniel. And this literature includes a series of books which claim to preserve the words of the scribe Enoch, born before the flood. There, in his name, significantly for our purpose, is an incredible explosion of knowledge about angels, explicitly listing their names, exuberantly speculating about their specific classes and types, kaleidoscopically describing their roles in the cosmos and human history, while also reflecting in detail about the questions of what makes angels different both from us and similar to us. In these very ancient extra-biblical Jewish books, angels are described as akin to people, the Jewish people in general at times, Jewish priests and scribes in particular. They write and read books. They teach scribes about astronomy, the cosmos, history, the end of time, the rise and demise of empires. Angels are set apart to serve God, sometimes even as priests within heavenly temples. But what is most poignant and most enduring, I'd suggest, about what we see in this ancient historical moment of change in discussions of angels is the insistence in these books that angels are not just superior versions of people. These are the very same books that are also the first to reflect on the fallen angels and why they fell. Within the Enochic Book of the Watchers, for instance, what's discussed the angels who fell to earth in the days before the flood, and what is stressed is that the reason is their envy. All angels, as spirits, are immortal, but what some of them, the Watchers, wanted is a very different way in which we, as flesh, are also immortal. We have sex, we have children. For this, some angelic Watchers are here said to have been willing to give up their immortality, their spiritual forms, their heavenly dwellings, to come to earth and take wives and sire sons, falling into flesh, as is quite nicely illustrated by this image by Sarah Olson on the left here. To be sure, in this story, the result is said to have been completely catastrophic. Their sons are giants who wrought violence which leads to the flood. Nevertheless, in the ancient Jewish books that describe the fallen angels, the point is not their sinfulness or the bad results, it's more their envy. Fallen angels function foremost to remind us of what we have but take for granted. We touch, we hurt, we love, and in our mortality and the fragility of that mortality is a power that even angels can't help but envy. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, we also find early examples of other ways that writing about angels can serve as a way to reflect on the human condition. Our hopes for justice, for instance, even if only in the afterlife or the end of time. Our desires for personal protection by otherworldly forces, as we see first in magical materials in the Dead Sea Scrolls and elsewhere, calling upon the names of personal angels for protection from demons and disease. And the notion, eventually, of guardian angels as well, protecting us personally. Thinking about what that earlier moment of change still says to us today, though, I think what is perhaps most enduring is not the question of what angels can do for God or for humankind, but as much of the question of what they say about us. Early biblical literature may use angels to write about the grandeur of God, but what is powerful about the historical change that we see in the Dead Sea Scrolls is the emergence of an interest in how angels can also be used to reflect upon ourselves, and precisely about what is most human about us, our weakness, our vulnerability, and all this enviable power that comes from it. Thank you.
And perfect timing. Thank you so much. Thank you. The next videos will be by Enrique Morones, who's the founder and director of Border Angels, an organization that works at the border between Mexico and the United States, and then Ravi Ragbir, who's a human rights activist and an organizer at the New Sanctuary Foundation here in New York. Did I say it right? New Sanctuary Coalition of New York City. Thank you very much. I always go between coalition and foundation. And Ravi is also here tonight. So I'm going to start with the video, please.
Hola, this is Enrique Morones, Executive Director and founder of Border Angels. We are literally right on the border. And what Border Angels does is it puts water along the border so migrants don't die as they're crossing. They're crossing the only way they can. They cannot get visas. And for us, every life is precious. And we believe that love has no borders. We want to have humane borders. And that's why, apart from leaving water along the desert on both sides of the border, we've also convinced the Border Patrol to open up the door between San Diego and Tijuana, and children are able to hug their undocumented parents that have been deported, sometimes for the first time in their lives, sometimes for the last time in their lives. It's very important that we have that contact. So please, love has no borders.
The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King called this nation to save our souls back in the civil rights action, to change the way African Americans were being treated. This is a moment where we also need to make a call out to save our souls because of the way immigrants and people of color are being treated and their rights are being taken away. We need to stand up, we need to step up, we need to step out and stop what is happening.
To call Mustafa Ali Farouqi, please, at the podium.
Okay, thank you. Okay, come. Is this on? Yeah. Come, don't sit around and masturbate. Today's your date to migrate, angels. Come, don't hesitate to change your fate. Don't wait till it's too late, angels. Come. You can live forever and never ever even live, angels, so come. Because if you don't, it's you yourself you'll never ever live to forgive, angels. Come. You see, the nights fight for the light of day. That's the fight of the angels, so come. Let's make tonight the night we make right the plight of the angels. Come, let God alone in heaven yearn for the angels. Come, let heaven, lifeless and frozen, burn for the angels. So thank you for the introduction, Paola, and I'm Mustafa Farouqi. I'm the founder of the Lab for Architecture, and I want to talk to you a little bit about some research that we've been doing about a project. It's an intake facility for an anonymous client, and the client's in the process of migrating between heaven and earth. The site for the project is on Governor's Island in New York Harbor. Incidentally, that's very close to Ellis Island, which is an inspiration and kind of a good precedent study for our own project and site. So I'm just going to take you through some aspects of our research. We've been doing a lot of work looking at drawing. Obviously, there's corporeal concerns with this client that are very important. They have wings, they can fly, they can land, they can take off. These are all sort of really important considerations and design implications alongside of that. But even things like seating are things that we're considering as well in our research. We're also looking at a more sort of existential view of drawing. I mean, if this is, we recognize that as architects, it's our role to sort of delineate unseen worlds, right? But how do we sort of imagine worlds that haven't been imagined yet, have never been seen before, right? But that are impending. And so we're looking a lot at architectural drawing, orthographic drawing, axonometric drawing perspectives, and thinking about how we can maybe recombine these or reconfigure these so that we can create a new vocabulary, a new language to show these new and unseen worlds. A little bit about existing conditions. So this is a client that doesn't have a free will. What does that even mean? Right? What does that look like? Well, to answer that question, we're looking very closely at a particular case study, the case study of the Prophet Muhammad's very famous night journey. This is a journey that he made from Medina on the Arabian Peninsula up to Jerusalem and then straight to heaven, all in one night. It happened in the 7th century. And so we've basically been taking a look at this, and we've created some drawings to sort of investigate this. And kind of come up with our own conclusions. Here we see from the source Sahih al-Bukhari, one of the hadiths, we see the Prophet Muhammad, who always appears with a green attaché. He's alighting from the dome of the rock, and the sort of text tells us that he's offered this choice between milk and wine. Later we find out that he made the right choice. Had he accepted the wine, his nation would have been led astray. What we don't really hear about is the work of these clients who have to serve these beverages at a very high altitude. Clearly, this is a very precarious situation, and it goes on. We don't have time to sort of go over all of the text, but here, as the Prophet Muhammad arrives in the first level of heaven, the text tells us, Sahih Muslim, it tells us that he's greeted by Adam and Eve, but not really, because they're caught up doing their thing in level 1, and it's all of our clients who are left sweeping and cleaning. It reminds me also, Annette, when you were talking about function, and sort of that's, I think, sort of comes through here. Again, all of this uncompensated labor. He meets John the Baptist and the prophet Jesus later on, again, facilitated by these clients. So I'm just going to read a little bit from our conditions report. Not the whole thing, because it'll be a bit dense. But, actually, I don't know why I put that down. The heavens are thick tonight, dense with discontent. Despair fills the air, colored with lament. The heavens are thick tonight, anger beyond belief. The clouds cry aloud, a thunder crash of grief. That's Moses. Among the angels rancor for happiness denied, for wanton prohibitions, for dreams ossified, for fantasies deferred, deleted aspirations, love foolishly exchanged for worthless masturbations. They're done with servitude, a life degenerate. They've had all they can take of God and his bullshit. See them gathered there, at heaven's door, challenging a circumstance that they've come to abhor. The edge of paradise is where we see them wait. The heavens are thick tonight. The angels are at the gate. And then I saved a little time for sex, because that's important. So these clients, they don't have sexual desire. That's something that we're thinking about. And we're working with private and public agencies to create this new prototype that will actually attach genitalia to their bodies. So the clients will end laterally, and then the genitalia will be sealed onto their bodies. That obviously creates a lot of heat, and that's why we have those cooling pools above the compound. We're also thinking a little bit about sort of how they'll test this desire for the first time. And so we've put all around the campus these special pods that allow them, they're bespoke, and they allow these clients to sort of test their human desire and their sexuality for the first time. And so just in closing, while we're talking about desire, it's difficult for it to be abated. And such is the case with these clients that we're working with. They haven't waited for even conceptual or schematic to be done. They've already left, and they're heading for Governor's Island right now. And so there's a crossing point that we all know about on the top of Williamsburg Bridge in between heaven and earth. And this is where they're sort of making this crossing. And so to sort of ameliorate that situation or to work with that, we have a temporary shelter set up for the clients where they can await the political fallout of what might or might not happen. What's also available at that shelter, actually, while they're biding their time there, is there's, and this is sort of, I think, second to last slide, there's a call station. And at this point, the clients are allowed to make one last call to God. So imagine you're saying goodbye to your lover for the last time, right after you're done keying their car, right? So this is what you can imagine. It's a personal call, and it's also sort of very private. The messages are very, very private. And the messages have actually been sealed in a secure server above Governor's Island, except you wouldn't believe what happened. And I'm just going to end with this. We actually have gotten a copy of some of these messages, and I'm just going to read them to you now in the name of research. And this is actually meant to be a video. I don't know if it'll actually move, but if it doesn't, that's okay. So these are the messages, the last messages that have been sent to God. Everything I gave to you, and I said, Allah, Allah. You made me a slave to you, and I said, Allah, Allah. Day and night I flew the skies, and I said, Allah, Allah. I waited on your terse replies, and I said, Allah, Allah. I figured you're the one for me, and I said, Allah, Allah. You made me fear apostasy, and I said, Allah, Allah. You had bad days, I bore the brunt, and I said, Allah, Allah. You made me feel a worthless cunt, and I said, Allah, Allah. I thought without you I can't cope, and I said, Allah, Allah. I turned my face away from hope, and I said, Allah, Allah. From me denied was every plea, and I said, Allah, Allah. For Moses, though, you split the sea, and I said, Allah, Allah. You told me you're the only one, and I said, Allah, Allah. Then came Mary's bastard son, and I said, Allah, Allah. You said Muhammad's my new fave, and I said, Allah, Allah. Go find him in some stinking cave, and I said, Allah, Allah. I knew I meant nothing to you, and I said, Allah, Allah. I thought it's what I have to do, and I said, Allah, Allah. They asked me, who has wronged you? They asked me, who has wronged you? And I said, Allah, Allah. I'm leaving him. And they said, who? And I said, Allah, Allah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa. That was great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mustafa. So the next videos will be by Natalia Oberti Noguera, who is the founder of Pipeline Angel Investors. Pipeline Angels, it's actually called, which is a capital, an investment company seeking capital for non-binary entrepreneurs, and especially for FAM, social entrepreneurs. And then it will be followed by an excerpt from an artwork by Micheline Thomas. Please, let's go with the videos.
As Marian Wright Edelman says, you can't be what you can't see, and by getting more of us on the investing side, we've been able to get more of us funded in the startup side. And so I'd say that's why I'm changing the face of angel investing, and that's why I'm so passionate about getting a more representative, a more inclusive ecosystem of angels, because if angels are helping strangers, how amazing to make sure that who that stranger is could be anyone, including those from the most marginalized communities. And I have something that I want to leave you with, which is this pocket mirror, which says, this is what an angel looks like. So whenever you're out there and you're thinking that an angel looks like a specific way, remember, an angel could be anyone. You could be an angel.
put love in your heart. We blacks have love in our soul. Paint us in your churches too. A painter painting our Lord's angels. Paint me some black angels now.
I would like now to call to the podium Jacoby Satterwhite, please.
Hello. No. Can we go your wrong order? Hello. There we go. Sorry. Okay, hi guys. Thanks for coming out tonight. So I wanted to talk about angels and demons because I think in Eastern culture or in other cultures, they kind of are the same, or like, you know, nothing's 100% good and nothing's 100% bad. And I mean, everything's kind of, I believe in living in the liminal space. So I kind of want to talk about my house when I was a child, which was 50% of me playing video game consoles ever since I was 2, going to church, and I was in the choir. My mother was the president of the gospel choir. It was a Methodist church in South Carolina. And also growing up with her developing schizophrenia, which caused her to have this paranoid relationship between the secular world and the real world. And with that said, that kind of like infrastructure of my life kind of designed my entire adulthood, pretty much. When I was a kid, my mother didn't allow me to go outside or play with friends, really. So I kind of had, I was raised by a television and a game console and also watching her make drawings. Because it was a chaotic home, my main escapism was having my father buy me these strategy guides for role-playing games that were like 400 pages and J.R. Tolkien novels, you know, strategy guides for heroes, fantasy books about heroes. I was obsessed with studying the narrative arcs of heroes and playing them in video games and mastering them and learning about different kinds of languages that heroes speak, whether they were elves or dwarves. Emulating their behavior in my, I would play pretend in my house and run around and, with a cape on and eating like the hero. I also drew the hero every day until I would draw Chun-Li from Street Fighter every day until my mother would believe that I could draw. And then she would let me use her drawing utensils because she was an artist herself. Now, the reason why I feel like this preface was important is because when my mother, for those who don't know, these are my mother's drawings on the left side, and these are 3D models of them, and these are the worlds that I composite them in. My mother was bipolar and manic depressant / schizophrenic, and during a hypomanic state, she would believe she was a god. She would believe that she was writing these animistic hieroglyphs that gave clues to the objects that we need to kind of like prosper in life. She would send them to companies to get invented, and they would be sent right back to her with like some polite letter. And she convinced me that these things were very important in the world. So I learned how to draw in order to help her make drawings. And that led to me finding more escapisms into making more drawings of heroes and more drawings of things that were from my imagination, and led me to studying art as a professional discipline. It led me to going, in a way, her braggadocious POV of herself as a secular unit connected to God, making these hieroglyphs for me to study how to live in the world, became true. Because I did take the drawings with me to college. And I didn't know what to do with them. I made paintings. I tried to be a German expressionist painter. I'm such a derivative fag, I can't even handle it. But then, we know ourselves more than we know history. So I decided to study myself. And you know, one thing we're talking a lot about this year is mental health and coping and mindfulness and getting back to the center, and also kind of like just being very self-aware. Eventually, I figured out, one day I started to trace the drawings with tracing paper. I mean, I was, you know, into like Dada and Fluxus experiments, and I was reading a lot about chants and language and ways of bringing performativity in my practice. And so when I was around 21, I decided to let these drawings become the architecture of my life. Like a lamp, a spoon, a fork, a lever, a pulley. I was taking chances with studying the enigmatic clues in the text and the drawings. These really weird double entendre language games that my mother played that would lead me to where I am today. Eventually, I learned how to build them as architectural models in a residency at Skowhegan. I taught myself 3D animation programs out of boredom, and I started to make these Bashian landscapes in 3D animation to kind of manifest the worlds that my mother was developing in South Carolina while I was playing video games. Eventually, I figured out how to synthesize my, eventually I figured out how to synthesize my dance performance and all my other artistic languages into one and make a 12-movie body of work that is still ongoing. Now, where I'm gonna switch to the next video. If I can, oh, do I do it? Boop, boop, boop. Oh wait, no, no, oh shit. Help me, guys.
Steve will help you. Yay.
Can we play sound? Okay, so what's really, these are the worlds that I built from the drawings. But what I find to be very compelling about this stage of my work, which is, this is a film I made this year, it's called Blessed Avenue, is that what this like lifelong world building that I've been working on has constructed for me is a suite of new kinds of angels, which is queer life in New York and San Francisco and Fire Island, and all of the communities I've been able to immerse in, make friendships, experiment with, and confide in as mutual creators. I feel like my friends, my queer friends who are artists and dancers, sex workers, doctors, nurses, they are my community of angels that the drawings that I have been working with for years in private have led me to kind of build my own kind of legend, my own kind of gaming world, my own kind of... Oh, and I only have 2 more minutes. Okay. And you're listening to my mother's voice too, so she's the voice of an angel. So basically all I'm trying to say is that one thing I find interesting is that like I'm a very agnostic person. I kind of don't believe in a secular world, but I do believe in consistency. I believe in following a guide, following a system. I believe in waking up every day and being loyal to a system I believe in like serendipity and fate that comes with action. And I believe my mother wrote me a series of actions to commit to for the rest of my life in order to build more communities of angels to help me create and continue the discourse as an artist. And that's what I have to say. Okay, so there you go.
Thank you, Jacoby. Thank you very much. The next 2 videos will be the first one by Jennifer Robinson. Jennifer Robinson is an Australian human rights activist and barrister and lawyer. Are you here, Jen? No, she might have been in New York, so I thought she might have been here. So Jen has really big cases that range from the BBC World News suing the government of Iran for trying to protect its own journalists, to actually Julian Assange. She's been defending him and on her legal team since 2010. And she's quite brilliant also in her advocacy for other human rights lawyers. And the next video, the video after hers, will be Wim Wenders. We don't need to say anything more, the director. And you know already, you can kind of detect what he will talk about. So please roll the videos.
As human rights lawyers, we protect both people and principles in our work, but it is the principles that ensure we protect all people, no matter how unpopular. Society should of course be judged by how we treat the most vulnerable, and as human rights lawyers, our work is often directed at protecting the most vulnerable people. But principles such as the right to be equal before the law and the right to a defence ensure that everyone is protected. I have clients, some consider a villain, others consider a hero, but what is important is the principle at stake, whether that be the right to liberty, the right to free speech, or the right to self-determination. These principles can't be compromised just because of the person involved. For me, those who exercise these rights and defend these principles and come up against powerful forces and oppression for doing so deserve our support and protection. It is by defending the principle of human rights, irrespective of who the person is, that ensures that everyone in our society and all people are protected.
What are angels thinking in the sky over New York today? Good question. Especially as they can hear our innermost thoughts, our dreams, our deepest desires. Not that I'm such a specialist, I just happen to have met a couple of them hanging out in the sky over Berlin about 30 years ago. My guess is the local angels in New York these days are utterly busy. People are very desperate, and they have many questions. When is this craziness coming to an end? When is truth respected again and the work by journalists no longer disqualified as fake news? When are morality and decency entering again into the equation of political life? As you know, angels can't really interfere, so they cannot really make anybody go to vote, but maybe they can just whisper into people's ears on a wing and a prayer, so to speak. Your vote counts more than ever, for heaven's sake.
And now I would like to call to the podium Calder Zwicky, who's the Assistant Director for Teen and Community Programs and also our own resident angel at MoMA. Yes, I should have said that.
Thank you. I get to follow Wim Wenders. So I was saying earlier today that I have the sneaky suspicion that I was invited here by Paola because the programs I run at MoMA are viewed by folks as being somehow a bit more angelic than the rest. And I'm deeply flattered, but it's also a very heavenly standard to live up to, and I'm already worried that I'm going to disappoint. I am, and the programs that I run here are deeply human at their core. So for the past decade, I've overseen all of MoMA's community partnerships and teen program initiatives. Our community partnerships represent all of the museum's work with nonprofit and community-based organizations, serving audiences such as incarcerated youth, post-incarcerated adults, HIV/AIDS organizations, homelessness initiatives, refugee services, adult literacy programs, and more. All historically underserved by most museum programs and all representative of our broader New York City populations. All offered free of charge and all created with the philosophy that we can make the museum, and by extension, the arts in general, as accessible as possible to everyone, regardless of any logistical, educational, physical, economic, or legal barriers. The other half of my job here involves overseeing all of MoMA's free programming for New York City high school students. Our free summer art classes, our weekly LGBTQ drop-in program, our behind-the-scenes initiatives, and our digital advisory board. Our newest teen program is called Night Studio, and it's a 10-week intensive after-hours program for teens currently in the process of getting their high school equivalency degrees. Like my partnerships, these programs are also offered completely free of charge, committed to the idea that all young people in New York deserve access to the arts, regardless of the inequalities of the public school system. But the fact that I've devoted most of my adult life to working with teenagers on these admittedly angelic programs often cracks me up a bit because I was far from an exemplary teenager myself. I was, to be honest, very, very badly behaved. I wasn't a danger to my community or anything like that, but I was definitely a danger to myself and possibly anyone within a 5 to 10 foot radius of me. Technically, I'm at work right now, so I don't want to get too graphic, but if my junior high and high school careers are distinguished in any way at all, they would be notable solely in regards to the variety of drugs that I ingested, the quantity of alcohol that I consumed, the constant string of lies that I attempted to pass off on my parents and teachers, the weeks of school that I skipped, and the blatantly unsafe ways that I navigated my immediate physical, sexual, and emotional surroundings at the time. But the thing that is now most shameful to me about my behavior at that age isn't the so-called bad things that I did as an adolescent. That all still feels very connected to me and to who I am, and I understand what drew me to act that way. The thing that I am more ashamed of is the intense apathy that I felt at that age, the way I squandered my talents and creativity and joy for life. Bad behavior is at least extreme, and it at least involves doing things. Apathy is a much, much scarier mode to exist within as a young person. But then at 16 years old, I got an opportunity through my big, anonymous, prison-like public high school to attend a weekly class at the Walker Arts Center, the Contemporary Art Museum in Minneapolis, the city that I'm from. I leapt at the chance. It meant a few less hours in my school building each week. And when I started taking the class, a huge change came over me. I was doing more than what was asked of me and looking forward to going to the museum each week. And I was being seen and praised for my creativity and all of the other things that I knew was inside of me, but that I'd been ignoring. And when they started the first Teen Arts Council in the country later that year, they asked me to join. And I was again inspired and found a place for myself as a teen, and a reason to create things, and then wrapping up this narrative in a very nice circular way, I've now devoted my life to providing the same experiences for young people today, working to open up art spaces just like they were opened up to me. But it's all much more complicated and blurry than that. The museum was the angel of my adolescence, but it was still an institution with funders to answer to and an audience goal to hit. They gave me an incredible opportunity and a voice, but they also had their institutional reasons, the most obvious being to remain relevant and to increase the number of young people who came through their doors, all potential future museum members and possible donors. And the redemptive nature of that story I tell is also complicated by another idea. The Walker never tried to get me to clean up my act or to become a better person in any way, to reform myself. They didn't tell me to stop skipping school. Instead, they said, if you're going to skip school anyways, why not come hang out here? And they never told me to figure out my shit or to stop being a mixed up and pissed off adolescent. Instead, they let me take all of my depressed, angry, misguided ideas and throw them outwards into the world. You want to make a free pass about kids killing themselves? Go ahead. You want to put a joke about getting kicked in the balls on the cover of a magazine for high school students? Be our guest. Or include a shoddily made cartoon about someone killing their boss? Here you go. Everyone there at the Walker seemed as mixed up as me, because they were, and the artists they introduced us to seemed even more mixed up than everybody else combined. So I still got to be a jerk, and a ball of hormones, and a druggie, and a cynical, stupid teenager. But I got to do all of that in an environment that not only made me feel safe and loved, but that celebrated my weirdness and made the things that came out of it seem cool and interesting. They gave me a voice and a place to be seen. And I never went to art school or studied art history. If anything, my experiences at the Walker made those things actually seem less interesting. But the second that I could, I jumped right back into making a life in the arts, especially in museums, because that's the place that made me feel loved and respected and cared for when I was young. And that, in turn, is all I ever try and do here with the young people that I work with. I could care less about redemption or rehabilitation or putting anyone on any sort of collegiate or career path. I could care less if any of our teens end up going to art school, and in fact, I hope the majority of them don't. But what I do take incredibly seriously, my calling or my goal in life or whatever you want to call it, is to provide these kids with a beautiful, perfect space where they can be mixed up and messed up, and tell them how amazing that is and how amazing the art that they make is, and to help them find new ways of sharing these amazingly imperfect feelings with the rest of the world. MoMA is an institution. We are not angelic, but we can provide a space that feels, for a few short years at least, somewhat heavenly. Thanks.
Whoa. Museum as angel, my God. So I would like to call you all here now to the dais. So we're gonna put Calder, you go there, so you bookend. Thanks, okay. Annette, you here, Jacobi here, and Mustafa over there. So it was really quite a great series of presentations, and it's well, I'm completely blown over by the Museum as Angel, because I've been thinking of Museum as R&D Center, Museum as Citizen, now Museum as Angel. Wow, I'll think about it more. But it's interesting, huh?
Or not.
Oh no! I mean, in your case, Angels is giving safe space to be yourself without judgment, right? So that's a big deal. So, and you talked, Mustafa, about the fact that angels have no free will. So, and then of course Jacobi looked at this kind of hypersexed angels, while we talked about genderless and sexless angels, but then angels in America, the angel had 8 vaginas and a bouquet of phalli. So I would like, in this day where another very dark and strong blow has been hit by the Trump administration towards transgender people, I think we should talk about angels and gender for a moment. So is the myth of the genderless angel, is that a reality? Is that really how angels were described in ancient texts? What's the deal? Annette, yes, it's your question first.
I think in ancient texts they are described as genderless, and kind of consistently so, even if in the times where angels want to be people, it's actually to have gender.
Mm-hmm. So angels want to become people so as to have gender as...
When they want to become people, it's like that's one of the things they clearly don't have. They don't have the ability to procreate. They're not male or female. Sometimes they're not even embodied. They're not fleshly at all.
But why were they made that way? What was the purpose of making angels that way in the system of ancient religions?
Well, within at least ancient Judaism and Christianity, I think part of the idea is that angels are part of the divine realm. So they're like spirit and fire and wind. So they don't have gender or the ability to reproduce. Although I would say there's, at least in part, by describing them like that, is to say that it's not just a kind of hierarchy where people are below angels, but people are actually have, like, we're the ones who get the distinctiveness, the creatures on the earth. Whereas they're just functional. They're just kind of helping the system. They're the ones who make sure the stars turn right. And at times, that's what they're jealous of. They don't. So
they're indentured labor.
Yeah, exactly.
Labor, right?
Precisely.
Well, do you think that maybe the gender is just like a signifier or an indication or a stand-in for desire? Because if they're basically supposed to be kind of like a wish fulfillment service for God, let's just say.
Yeah, precisely.
Right, then like the gender can just be kind of like it's like once wanting that means that you want something other than fulfilling God's command. I don't know if that could, if it works that way.
Jacobi, you want to, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm super agnostic about all kinds of secular things, as I said before. I mean, I'm much more, I actually am an extreme believer in serendipity and the consequences of constant action. I believe in being ready for an opportunity, and I believe in how certain events can segue to certain events, and they can constellate into something that feels so, like, things can rhyme, like things in life can rhyme with each other if you allow them to. You could be like, wow, I took this action 9 steps ago, and it somehow makes so much sense with what the ultimate consequence of where I am today is. And if I didn't do that, I didn't go to that, like if I didn't go to this lame school that I thought was lame originally, I wouldn't have met so-and-so. So I believe, like, for me, the idea of the angel is the negative space of life, the parts of life that aren't visible, that sit around form, but that allow form to kind of merge into one. You know what I mean? It's, I don't know, I think there's positive space and there's negative space, and if that's the angels live in that realm.
Well, that actually reminds me a little bit of, I was doing the homework and reading one of your articles. And you talked a little bit about in one of the articles about exactly this quality of negative space, but at a different time period. And you were saying actually there was a time when everything between humans and the heavens was actually not just empty space, but filled with
stuff.
The idea of the populated world, where it's like when we, in modern times, at least many people in modern times, there's at least a scientific view where sometimes people imagine that space is space. Yeah. There's nothing in between. Mm-hmm. But for many people in antiquity, especially in the worlds that kind of create traditional ideas about angels, the idea is that space is filled. It's the space is filled with the subtle bodies of angels and demons.
But if you look at all the Titian paintings, like Assumption of Madonna, and there's always like these cherub, there's like a vertical canvas in 3 spaces divided. There's a cloud, there's like a U arc, and there's these cherubs, and then there's the Madonna in the center.
It's very crowded.
Yeah, it's very crowded. But there's this like, it's almost like Candy Crush, the way that they play with, you know, the different layers of narrative play with each other. And I feel like that's the point of church. It's like to get people into a rhythm and a system that can build consistent positive serendipity moments, which is what I believe the role of the angel is to teach, the role of religion is to teach people a false sense of discipline around a myth so they can not go off the deep end. Because I'll tell you this, being an artist, I'm sorry to keep, I just have to say this and I'll let it go. Being an artist in New York City, growing up very protected in church, the more I got into liberal environments and the more I left the more I began to segue into more real life experiences in alternative communities, I have found myself limitless with how much I could transgress, and there was no boundaries, and I could probably have died many of times with the certain actions and things that I've consumed and the amount of debauchery that I allowed myself to go into without a guide or a system, and being agnostic, without a myth that is above me that I'm following, without trying to live up to my mother or father's standards because they really didn't have standards, because they truly loved me for who I was. So it took a lot of failure and a lot in gliding off the rhythm and system to look for the angels again, to build. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. Mm-hmm. So you build the angels through experimentation. The angels is really just finding something to believe in.
Going back to,
sorry.
Yeah.
No,
okay, I was just going to say, because the thing that jumped out to me when you're talking about serendipity and the way that these things, to me, I've always felt, and I was raised very not religious. I would say almost anti-religious. So it's very hard for me to wrap my head around some of these things. But what you were saying about serendipity and angels, it makes me feel like angels and these things that are looking out for us and push us in these directions, to me, feel like a way for us to grapple with the real randomness and the scariness of that randomness that really is our lives. The idea of, oh my God, I'm so glad I met that one person because I got off the train at that stop and then that changed my life. That must have somehow been an angel or been someone pushing me in that direction, rather than being able to really acknowledge the deep chaos of the world and the deep randomness of how any of us got into this room today. So
that's really the point of this whole gathering tonight. Angels are not necessarily religious, and they are, how many of us have a story like that, the train or airplane? I mean, a colleague was telling me exactly that the other day about a serendipitous meeting on a plane. So that's a really good point. You also had a lot of good reactions while Jacoby was speaking, but also when he was talking about the strategy books. And so I wanted to ask you, what is the difference, in your opinion, Calder? Yeah, I also merged the two of you between an angel.
Well,
yeah, no,
I'll take it.
Yeah, right. No, I know you'll take
you.
it. Okay, between an angel and a hero.
Oh God,
Yeah.
I was reacting just because I was a Dungeons and Dragons player, and I remember just getting lost in the
RPGs.
idea of the physical book. You're talking about the books and the physical objects, even before video games. I remember the idea of creating a character and taking all of these characteristics and adding them up and turning them into a person and imagining yourself as that person, and maybe you're very strong, or maybe you're very cunning, or maybe you're very wily. It always felt like you were just starting from nothing, and then of course there was this role playing and wish fulfillment and everything. That's what I was reacting to.
Oh, okay.
I think it's funny you mentioned that, because I didn't play Dungeons and Dragons, but I did play this thing called Diablo. I don't know if you know of that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Diablo.
Oh my God, the kindred spirits here.
Absolutely.
Diablo, oh my God, yes.
No, but what's interesting about it is when I was between age 10 through 12, I was diagnosed with osteogenic sarcoma, which is a bone cancer, and it was in my shoulder, and they thought I was going to die. And one thing they do with those kids in the pediatric where they have a Make-A-Wish Foundation, it's like an Angels Make-A-Wish Foundation. It's ironically called Angels. I don't know. And they're like, the kids can meet like a celebrity or something. I was like, fuck that. I don't want to meet Michael Jackson. I don't want to meet, like, I was like, I want a computer. I said, I want a state-of-the-art computer and I want games. And so he gave me, this bro came with Duke Nukem, which was like a stripper shooter. You go up and shoot strippers, and it's really weird. I don't understand. He's like, yeah, I got you some great games. Got you a Pentium 1. I said, Pentium 3 is out now.
The ungrateful Make-A-Wish.
But then he got me Diablo, and it was like, that was the beginning of that cycle of playing Final Fantasy, and it's just, yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like those moments. Even the literal ones when they say the angel in a Toyota with a fake Pentium 1 computer. I don't know. Anyway.
Mustafa, the narrative behind your project is so impeccable and so well rehearsed and so perfect. You must have done a lot of research on angels just to be able to answer all the questions and just steer the whole ship. So how did you prepare?
Yes.
Yes? No? Yeah.
It's interesting, actually, because before we were, when we were sort of putting all of this together, and then we had the phone conversation about sort of things that we would talk about, and then Samantha, who did a really great job organizing.
Where's Samantha?
Where she is.
Oh, okay.
She quit.
Hey,
It's
Samantha.
too much after the first one.
Your baptism of fire, yay!
Yes. But she. So
Yeah,
I remember,
come on.
Samantha, you were asking about, you had emailed me and you said, something about our conversation. I was talking about Jibrail and Iblis on the phone, and I was in the car at the time during that conversation. But you had said, oh, it would be great if you could sort of forward me some readings about this. And I was thinking about it, and I'm like, actually, the readings are my grandmother. The readings are like my dad and all these things. And you were saying, oh, I'm from a Jewish tradition. And so like some of the things that you were talking about, I hadn't heard of. But I think it's really interesting how we sort of like, I mean, yeah, and when I was looking at the stuff that you had put on the list that a lot of us have probably looked at, or I was thinking like, this is actually a different kind of perspective than what I've heard, not necessarily because it was a different religious tradition, but because it's different when it's coming from like, from that, I don't know, from that sort of, that side of the headset. As opposed to when it's coming from like, sitting at the foot of the bed and like your grandfather's recounting all these things to you about Muharram or Karbala or all these things that every year. And we were just like, God, it's the same story every year about Jibrail, Farishta, and all of these things. But it's like, so much of it is just things that I've sort of heard, and then I become curious when I hear other people talk about these experiences, then I look them up. So I looked up Book of Enoch and the Watchers and things like that, and then that's a new research but I think it's two parallel lanes.
Got it. I would like to also open it up to the audience because there are so many people here tonight that have, some of them have contributed videos and others instead are in professions that might be considered angelic. Do you have any questions already for our speakers here? Yeah, one of the microphones, yeah. Yeah, Ravi, please.
So they differentiate the angels from the humans because of their gender. Therefore, are we saying that people in the Midwest are more angelic because they don't know how to have sex?
Yo, I totally reject that idea. I said I was from Minneapolis in my talk.
Well, I didn't say that they didn't have sex. I said I meant even when they have sex, they don't enjoy it.
Okay, again, I have to stop this line of what the fuck is going on here? I mean, all joking is, I would say I'm sure that the idea of removing gender and sexuality from angels just goes to the idea that that's one of those kind of religiously viewed crass things about us as humans, and that if you take that away, they are immediately elevated above us, right?
I think in some of the traditions, it's thought, there are two different sets of traditions. And what I find fascinating are the traditions that see the human gender and sexuality positively. And that's also why I'm interested in I personally, you could have, there's a lot of good angels, but I'm interested also in the angels that transgress. Because I think there's incredible power of that sense of precisely the ones that still, you think they are the ones who have the least reason to
but he has a mic.
I have a mic.
Oh, you're right.
I call them probiotics.
Yeah, there you go.
It's like a kombucha, but it's like alive.
But in a case, there definitely are traditions that say, especially later Christian traditions that really believe angels have no gender in a way that people should also act as if they have no gender. But I like the earlier traditions, and I think in a lot of these cases, the traditions there's a tension within them. And one of the tensions is like, actually, that's not what you would want anyway. That, how depressing are your angels you have to make the genitals for?
Right, well, I think there's also...
But I think you have both possibilities.
Yeah.
And that's what's actually interesting. It's not necessarily one judgment or another. It's a conversation that allows for either position to be held and defended.
Well, I've also, I was reading I don't know if you've read Ibn Khaldun, and he's written this in the Muqaddimah, which is like one of the oldest historiographies from 14th century. And he writes about this sort of the transition between sort of rocks and minerals to plants, and then plants to sort of living things, and then living things at the top of which is humankind, and then angels. So it does seem like there's a hierarchy. But when he talks about angels, he says that they actually have to slough off their humanity, and they have to sacrifice their humanity. So even though there is a kind of seems like it's building a hierarchy, I still think that there is this aspect of loss and sacrifice.
Yeah. So as an official angelologist, when you hear, you are an angelologist. So when you hear that people are angels, how do you like smile saying, oh, that's not possible, it's just like, apples and pears? Or do you accept the angelic characteristics when they're projected onto humans?
I guess I find, to the degree that I study angelology, it's ways that angels are used to organize knowledge about the world. Mm-hmm. And it's actually very powerful examples of angels being used to organize knowledge about the world.
Even in today's life in an immanent way?
Yeah. This idea that angels are useful for as demons are as well. They're useful for how do we make sense, especially of a chaotic cosmos, a sense of experiences that actually by themselves often don't seem to have very much meaning or structure. And the fact that in a lot of cases, ideas about otherworldliness or the unseen that have very lengthy genealogies in the past are kind of continually get used and reused in useful ways. And I find that actually part of what's powerful about it.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Do you see it? Oh, okay. So then I'm gonna keep on asking them. I'm sorry?
Hi.
Oh.
Hi, everyone. I'm really interested in this idea of architecture and like that angels in some images we saw that angels even constructed the like a physical realm from heaven, but also like this idea that they can transgress and then maybe even create architectures in our known world. If you could speak to how, I don't know, like this idea of architecture, of how angel intervention or angel kinds of heavenly bodies, and if there's any way that you have anecdotes of heavenly bodies reconstructing architecture in the known world, or does that make sense?
Yeah, well,
cool.
I guess one of the things, and this came up in our conversation, I have it too, that came up in our conversation was this idea of architecture, and also architecture being sort of like a configuration of desire. So, like when you actually you're sort of walking along the street and you desire something, that's actually when an architect should stop by and be like, I can help you with that, because that's what we're here for. And I think that angels sort of expressing desire, for me, it just seemed like a very natural thing, that there would be like the first time when an angel expresses desire, that becomes sort of the point where an architect should enter that dialogue. And the reason that I keep them anonymous is because of the stakes are so high, right? Because at least in our tradition, right, there's Lucifer, Iblis, he's a fallen angel, or one of the fallen angels. And basically the story behind that is that God creates all of these angels, and then God creates man. And he tells all of the angels, now you have to bow down in front of man. And all of them do. Gabriel, Michael, all of them, one by one. And then Iblis, Satan, he says, no fucking way. and I'm not going to do that. And God says, why not? And then Satan says, I love you too much. You're like, why are you drinking this mankind Kool-Aid? Like, it's you. Like, I adore you. I love you. I'll never bow down in front of anybody else. And so this explication of desire by Iblis, by Satan, is what gets him kicked out of heaven. And he becomes that first angel who actually desires something. And yeah, he probably went to go talk to an architect right after that, because that's where you have to go. And so for me, those two things, I think architecture is very much about wanting things, about needing certain things, and architects deal with desire all the time, right, on a day-to-day basis. And so it's also because it's my field, but I guess for me, that's why those two things I kind of came together.
Gosh, your grandmother really was very detailed in her.
Yeah, no, that wasn't her topic.
I'm impressed.
Right?
My grandma was not, was not as detailed as yours. Other questions?
I have a comment or maybe a comment and a question. I wanted to thank you for using the term Abrahamic religions, and that you also included Islam. And that leads me to the comment about the Annette. You constantly did not include it. I found that troubling because in Islam we do have a concept of angels, and they are functional, and the names are very much the same as in the Injil and the Torah. So I found that kind of interesting, and angels have a specific function.
I was just going to say that that was part of why I was very deliberate about, I only talked about one historical moment. So I stopped in the 3rd century BCE, in part because I had 7 minutes.
Yeah.
But in much of my work, I do go on and actually talk about Islamic angels, and because it's obviously part of the same complex, part of the same world.
And actually in the readings, the reading list, there are some parts of her
So
work.
in a sense is, I just tried to highlight one set of scenes that I thought would be very early, but also less familiar, where you really see that kind of element of humankind coming up. Although for what it's worth, I think this notion of is precisely the Iblis traditions are among what become the kind of most compelling developments of ideas about angels that we also find, not as much among Christians, but also among Jews. It's part of this kind of shared idea of this notion of angelic human rivalry.
So
who is man that we are mindful of?
Do angels transcend faiths in a way?
Oh, definitely. That's what's
messenger.
actually amazing in a sense is I showed a couple images of kind of magic bowls and so forth. And I showed Jewish ones. There are also Islamic ones. There are also Manichaean ones. Angels travel more across the boundaries of religious traditions than virtually anything else. Angels and demons. And you can trace the names across, and especially across Hebrew and Aramaic on the one hand, and Arabic on the other. They travel. They're the same figures.
Right, and when Gabriel,
they're shared worlds.
Yeah, and when Gabriel comes to see the Prophet Muhammad in the cave, he says, I've come from the God of Moses. I have come from the...
But no, we have a case, and in a lot of senses, like a lot of things that you describe of things that you heard from your grandparents are things that have textual threads that have textual threads that have textual threads. And you can't reduce it to history, but it is a case of a different kind of, in the kind of larger fabric. I think that one of the things that is, I've actually written about quite a bit, is that one of the things that's actually most fascinating about those traditions is those are places where different religions, actually not only limited to Abrahamic religions, often have more in common. So there can be arguments about doctrine on other fronts, but ideas about everyday life, of the otherworldly realms, invisible population, are things that you often find quite in common. So.
Could I just ask, I don't want to mispronounce your name, the young man.
There's three.
In the black t-shirt.
Cook holder.
No, not Mustafa.
Which one?
Who uses the
Jacoby.
best, Jacoby.
Yes, Jacoby. I was really very intrigued with your notion about serendipity, because it resonates in Islam, and your interpretation of it is very similar to ours, that is when angels intervene, that your fate could be whatever, and that but for what you call serendipity or an angel.
I also call it mindfulness and meditation.
Well, mindfulness, I think, is when you take control over it. I'm talking about.
I need to ask you.
Can I just ask the question so
Sure.
you can get answer, and then you can I can get off the mic. I just found that a very interesting way of perceiving serendipity. You said that it had a lot to do with your upbringing, and I just wonder if you could give an example of one situation.
Oh, I just think about like, I've been personal this whole time, but to like paraphrase my personal narrative arc is that a lot of things happened simultaneously, and the only thing that got me through was mindfulness and optimism, constant rigorous action, and I guess building a template and a language around me to kind of carry me forward. Now, what I mean by that is like like I said, when I was a kid, I got cancer, and then I was separated from my mom, and I had to live a certain way that basically just my life kind of has been a very peculiar domino effect. But one thing I will say in my adulthood, because life is challenging, and I'm an artist, and I have a very like unpredictable, like I guess, professional space that I work in. So it's all about having faith in this abstract hypothesis that you're putting in the world. So in order to control my anxiety, I found a positive relationship between allowing serendipity to come in result of my strong mindfulness and my strong meditation skill, my strong use of language that reinforces the direction that I want to take in my life, and to contribute as an angel that I think that I am as an artist. Because I think as artists, we're genderless, creative people that are producing things for a greater discourse. So I don't know. I'm very abstract when I say that, but I mean, it would take too much. It would be too. I can't paraphrase it actually, because it would require me to go into specific details.
So I have a gentleman with white T-shirt with letters first, and then we'll go to Mohammed. So, white T-shirt. Raise your hand. Higher. Yay. There you go. Thank you.
Hey. I really like that you included the angel investor in the videos, and I was thinking of that scene from the John Carpenter movie They Live, where he puts on glasses and he looks at money and says, "This is your God," and just kind of thinking about like the very particular like U.S. sort of gospel of capitalism and what role kind of like wealth plays in terms of how we think of angels and how we sort of equate money with not only power but also some kind of like religiosity. And sort of thinking of how that weaves through all of the, wealth of nations in terms of immigration, also like philanthropy and organizations, and how that gives access to certain people. And even in the art world where, people with wealth and power are able to canonize artists and sort of launch their careers. So this is just a general question of how wealth relates to that kind of idea of angels.
Wealth and angels. It's a big loop, but in a way, angels is this slippery but also comprehensive concept. So I'm glad that you brought this up. And I also found it funny that they're called angel investors. But Calder, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think about that all the time because, like I said, all the programs that I run here at MoMA are money-losing endeavors. I don't bring in a single cent into the museum.
Yeah, neither do I. We're we're the best. Yay.
But so the question then is, who is giving us the money to do these things and why? Is it just out of the goodness of someone's heart? Do people just say the world needs programs like this? Is it more complicated than that? Do people want to attach their names to it? Does the museum want to use the audiences that I work with as a way of showing us as a more angelic institution than maybe we are? It's very difficult as someone who kind of takes in money and tries his best to spread it around as many audiences in the best ways possible, but it's hard for me to be choosy in a sense because I don't really have a leg to stand on. It's hard for me sometimes to be to push back because who cares? You could just stop working with these audiences at any time and most people wouldn't even notice. I'm sure most people don't even know about the work that we do with these audiences in the first place. So it's a tenuous kind of interesting relationship that's fraught with different levels of power.
On the other hand, Natalia sent us a very long video, which we edited down, but in another part of the video she said that what defines angel investors is that they use their own money. So in a way, money in this case is about giving some of you, it might still be distorted, but there is a physical almost altruism or risk-taking that happens. And also she defined angel investors as people that invest in people they don't know yet. You know, so there was this very direct, which is also what people say when they talk about angel investors. It's the most, it's almost the lowest rung of investing beings instead of celestial beings, right? It's the ones that get more enmeshed.
But but the term investor implies that there's going to be some payoff in the end. And that, in a sense, to me, feels like it isn't philanthropy. It isn't this benevolent act. There's a payday, hopefully, at the end of it. And we can mix in the goodness and the desire to do the right thing, but investor and angel, to me, seem not
I think that also the well-being that you get from having done a good deed is an investment. I don't know. I just, I mean, I have no money. I've never been able to make money. It's not my thing. But still, I think that there are other currencies besides, well, we're getting, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, well, one thing that's constantly said about if you're going to give, never expect anything in return. I mean, otherwise you're not giving. So, yeah, their currency is like, yeah, there's a sense, there's a peace of mind when you're contributing to someone else's life. They say when you give, people who give are more happier. So. Yeah. But that's not, but this investor, I agree with him, investor sounds so like.
It sounds weird, I agree, yeah.
Stock market.
Mohammed.
So I had kind of a quick comment and then a question. I come from a culture, Egypt, where it's usually old people that tend to see angels. So the young people in the family will either think they're crazy or that they're using the angels that they're seeing to sort of as agents to deliver messages that they actually want to say themselves, but they use the angel to say them. You know, like, a grandma would wake up and say, I saw an angel and she said, wash the dishes. So there is that kind of agency that angels are sort of given in that sense. But the other thing that I was really thinking about was when we started to refer to people that we have a crush on or that we fall in love with as angels.
I never do. Does anybody here do it?
Like my angel, baby angel. This kind of language. I think it's actually something that starts in the 18th century with Romanticism, and which is also happens to be the time with the rise of secularism and the image, the aesthetics of sort of the angel as the human that we love or that we have desire for is usually sort of the pure, white, glowing kind of Renaissance-inspired one. And so now jump straight forward to contemporary Egyptian pop culture. There's a lot of angels in love songs, and there's a lot of love songs, and it's always an angel. And in the music videos, they would tend to be sort of this kind of neo-Renaissance thing where it's glowing, plump lips, and so they're sexy but innocent, and which works really perfect in a Muslim society, contemporary Muslim society, where you're not supposed to talk about sex, but you have a lot of desire for beautiful people that happen to be angels. So I'm just thinking if you want to reflect on this idea of sort of angels as untouchable objects of love.
Who wants to take this? Mustafa. Yes, Mustafa.
Yeah, I was thinking more of the grandmother seeing the angel in her dream saying you should marry your second cousin, and that's what she could say. But that's buying some time. I think that yeah, in terms of what you're talking about, in terms of like this persona of the angel of something that you really, really want, but you can't really have, and I think it relates a little bit to angel investor too. I think it's something, it's a fantasy. And I think that that's a lot of what I'm thinking about in my project, or in this particular project, is that this idea of just sort of, and I bet we all have different thoughts on this, but of just relentless giving to think that there's, or just, you know, to think that there's no bounds, or to think that there's no resentment that comes with that might be is like a little, whether it's like the Malik in the video or whether it's the angel investor, I think that resentment has to be taken into account always. At least that's how I live.
Yeah, it also feels so chaste to me.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to have sex with an angel.
Nah.
But I want to have sex with my girlfriend. You know what I mean? And it's a strange kind of thing. And it also, I guess I feel like people kind of, to me, and again, I'm very cynical about this. I don't have a background that explains this to me, but it feels to me like people see angels almost as like a winning the lottery type thing. Like you cast these numbers or this prayer out into the universe, and this thing does it for you and solves a problem for you. And I think that's a very strange way to think about the person that we're in love with, as if they're coming along to save us or to solve a problem for us. Usually they're creating problems for us, I think.
Sheetal, in the middle there.
Hi, thank you all. So I have a question for all of you, including you, Paola. So I'm Hindu, and the equivalent of angels are probably called deities in English. And the root of them is the personification or the embodiment of things that we don't understand in our corporeal body. So things like tides and the rising of the moon and the sun, all of these are personified in different deities. And so one of the ways I understand angels is the embodiment of things that are outside of our bodies, our ways to understand the abstract world. And I think of religion in that way as well. And at the beginning of this conversation, Paola said that part of the impetus for having a salon about angels is because of the moment that we're in now. And I like to think of angels as something that we can actually produce as humans. There are ways we can manifest them to try to understand things that are outside of us, like serendipity, for example, where you can't explain it, right? So I was wondering if any of you had thoughts about what kind of angels you might manifest today. What do we need? What are some of the ideas or things that could be embodied through an idea of something that is like transhuman, like beyond any of the things that divide us, that could bring us together? I'm just interested in that idea, since you guys have talked about angels in these ways that are separate from us, but also connected to us.
Annette, you want to take this?
No, so thank you for that. Thank you for the question, and also for raising. I mean, we have focused on largely kind of monotheistic contexts, but I think many of the ideas, even from antiquity and so forth, take place in worlds in which monotheism is the exception. I think historically has been of an idea. So you have Devas and Asheras and Greek daimones and kami in Japan. Yeah, I mean,
kami.
That's the kind of. I mean, my kind of family background is closer to an idea of a kind of, from Japan, is like closer to a world in which you have a kind of a vivified nature and cosmos that isn't limited to any kind of strict hierarchy. So that kind of notion that in some ways I think one of the things that as a scholar I find attractive about angels and demons is they're closer to that kind of full and moving cosmos that's not just a kind of an emptied monotheistic world that imagines only one power. But in any case, in terms of today, I never get to talk about today because I'm a historian.
That's exactly what historians should do.
I know, nobody ever lets me do it, but I'm happy to be here and be able to have that license. But I do think that, a number of the kind of cases where people have reflected on kind of the political moment is a political moment that I think in terms of these, of a notion of issues of, justice, equity, inclusion. I mean, these are things that are so pressing, and also, have in recent years slipped away faster than I think many of us thought was possible. Oh, yeah. And so I think it is a moment where this notion of these that the invisible connections that we trusted in, many of which seem to be disappearing within our society. Not disappearing, actually, actively attacked. A case of having some way of thinking about those connections as ways, like the things that exist in the spaces that, allow things to cohere instead of fall apart. Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of what one would imagine, or, what I would think of as being pressing.
Calder?
Yeah, I would say the same thing, and I guess I touched upon it, but spaces to love and to feel loved, spaces to give shelter and to create feelings of safety, spaces to be seen and to be heard truthfully. And also, I think spaces, especially right now, for real dialogue, because I think the young people coming to our programs here, at least, they're growing up in this incredibly polarized world, and there's a lot of fear about being right or being wrong, or being correct or being incorrect, and I think the school system reinforces that. And I think that, you know, if we can provide anything angelic as an institution, it's a space where subjectivity gets to rule, and where subjectivity gets to allow people to have differences and still be seen and heard with one another.
Ravi, can I borrow a net here for a second? Yeah.
So I need to apologize. New Sanctuary Coalition organizes people of faith, to citizens to protect people who are non-citizens who are facing deportation, right? So I'm very uncomfortable with this conversation because one of the things we tell our volunteers is you're not the Messiah. You're not an angel. Because that takes away from the power of the person. If you're an angel or Messiah, it means that I am giving up my power to you, and therefore I am going to be led. If we're talking about justice, right, we're talking about creating a safe place for everyone. We cannot be different levels. We need to be equal. Yeah. So our training for everyone is, you're not an angel, you're there to walk side by side. So I do work with a lot of faith people. I was also Hindu in the past, I'm a Christian now. I've been in those spaces where we have that type of representation. But I think we are at this moment where we need to stop talking about angels as helping us instead of talking about how we can create our own serendipity, so that if there's a door open, it's not about an angel coming to us, it's about a door being opened to us so that we can change what is happening, because that's the door that we were allowed to enter.
Those pivots are what I call angels. You know, if we think about everything in a constellation and you think about the bisecting point where like action meets results, I think that's the angel. Mm. Every time I feel a result in my life, which is rare, it feels heavenly. I fucking can't even handle the euphoria that I get when I have one moment of relief from this hellhole called Earth. And that's when the angels are. You're right, I believe in that. Sorry. Okay.
So you see angels as an abdication of responsibility almost, or well, it's interesting because they could also be seen as the opposite, as like almost powerless, just there to let us be ourselves. Sorry, you were about to say something? No. Mm-hmm. It's interesting, you know, so there are angels that are very vulnerable, that almost prompt the human to kind of take charge and therefore feel empowered. But demons like that too, yeah. Absolutely. We haven't talked about demons at all.
That'll be a next one.
Yeah, the next.
Yeah. It's a complicated subject. I mean, it's really hard. Yeah. Like, it's kind of impossible for 5 people to flatten out these concepts.
No, but that's the point of these salons. Yeah. It's never, ever, ever to come to any conclusions.
I know. I mean,
we're not closing the book on angels tonight,
Absolutely not. We're just opening it, you know, and we'll see where it goes, you know. So. There's wait, I never look in the back. Is there anybody? Oh, yeah, somebody there with a really, and then I'll come to you. Yes, over there, standing.
If we have time for 2, should we logistically go over first?
Yeah, no, there's very, very last row standing, and then we're gonna go back here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
One of the books I read this year that was really fascinating is called John Dee and the Empire of Angels, which is all about this court occultist for Queen Elizabeth. And the thesis of the book outlines essentially this idea that angels in the 1500s used this man to set forth this domino effect that is playing out in global politics today, essentially. It's a 300-page book. It's dense, but pick it up if you're interested. one of the through lines from that book that came up in conversation in all of your presentations was that of agency and whether or not angels necessarily have it or exercise it. And I think that also applies to the conversation about the difference between an angel and a hero. I think often when we talk about angels, they don't necessarily, people that we describe as angels aren't necessarily people who undertake heroic acts, but they might be people who are sort of in the right place at the right time. And so that made me think about, in an increasingly automated, mediated world where serendipity is almost engineered, for all of our hand-wringing about technology, is it possible that we're heading towards a time and a place or a future where human beings are more angelic by nature?
Doesn't seem like it.
Right?
Or,
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. I feel like in the information age, all the energies combined are just at a rapid evolving rate and super intense. And the things that are dark are like matte black, and the things that are light, I mean, I just think that everything is just scaling up and fighting and getting more entangled into something much more. Like, it's funny when you think about like Instagram and YouTube and a lot of people being plucked out and given opportunities through like just chance. And it's almost kind of like life is becoming a lottery in itself. But with that said, it worries me because I think of the zany, cute, interesting culture that's going to come of that in the next 10 years where everyone is trying to buff up their eccentricity. Like the clown acts that come, like, you know what I mean? I'm just afraid of the way human behavior will begin to evolve with the democracy of how people get plucked out and by these angels who give them the opportunity to make them viral, like the influencer culture. Like you think about the way society is moving, young people more so want to develop a demigod kind of art, like a profile on Instagram or YouTube and sell that and make 6 figures on it. And I think it's creating a new type of archangel. Or you know.
Interesting. I'm getting so, yeah, go ahead, Calder.
No, nothing. I like that term.
I like it too.
Oh, you're all in danger, trust me.
Yeah. So over here, question?
Well, thanks again for the wonderful conversation. I find myself still a little stuck on something. None of this good that I think we're discussing is necessarily objective, right? Or is objective at all. And I think in this moment of today where you have so much craziness, and we, I think, describe it, you know, as badness or whatever, those people have angels too, I would guess, right? And so there's a degree in which I would wager that we have a certain consensus of what the goodness that angels should do is. And I think by definition, it's not what other people hold as things that are angelic, right? And I think this is nothing new, but now we are in a moment where there's some crazy things going on, right? With other angels backing those philosophies. I guess, I don't know if there are any reflections to be had.
Well, yeah, Calder, did you? No.
Nope.
I get often the criticism from my husband of the fact that I always present one side of the spectrum. And I tried this time, for instance, to introduce some angels from the other side of the spectrum in my presentation, and then I took them out. I just couldn't, you know, so it's interesting. You might be right that maybe there are also angels that are polarized and polarizing. Did you want to say something about it?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, I mean, it's a good point in some ways because we've talked a lot positively in terms of the way that discussions about angels, kind of acts of imagining angels, are unifying and cohere. But I think there are also, both historically and the present, ways in which there are grounds of counterclaims. I mean, actually, it's interesting. In the age of John Dee, it was also true, where he made his claims and other people made quite different claims about what angels said and did. And so, a sense is you do have that politicization, and that's another. It's just another story that you can tell in the same way, even if we've really been highlighting, you know, a case of that notion of what harmonizes and coheres. So I think, in a sense, as any kind of emblem of authority can readily, be contested, and it is true. It's like in a different setting, in a different kind of case of an assumed that you could have a different conversation in which the other side of a political divide would get to define what is angelic, what doesn't count as being heavenly enough to be angelic. And I think that in a lot of ways that's actually what becomes at stake. What's not pure enough.
So we project ourselves onto our angels.
Yeah,
definitely, right? Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah, and that's what Amanda Lawrence was saying. Playing an angel is a very human act, after all, and it's this enmeshing of the celestial and the human that makes angels, I guess, so interesting. Well, it's been a wonderful, confusing, non-conclusive conversation the best kind, right? Where we talked about guardians, messengers, terrifying, protecting, beings that want to be human, aspire to be us while we aspire to be them. So really it's interesting how angels reflect our insecurities and our uncertainties. So I think that this has been really, truly a great conversation. Do you have any closing statements, my friends? No? You're good?
Thank you.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Please stay with us. We're going to have our usual great wine and super snacks outside, and we can all continue the conversation. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you to the four of you. You've been fantastic. Thank you.